The stagecoach wheezed to a halt in the red dusk, kicking up caliche dust that clung to the hem of her skirt like stubborn memory. Josephine Hart stepped down with a worn satchel and the last of her hope. The little town of Dunridge, Wyoming, squatted on the edge of nowhere, split by a single muddy road and lined with clapboard buildings slumped by wind and time. No welcome committee, no flowered bouquet, no strong arms to gather her up. Just wind and the faint creak of a sign swinging above the general store. She looked for the man who'd written in script so clean it near broke her heart. "My name is Elias Cutter. I have a homestead, 4 horses, and a heart too long alone. I seek a wife with a gentle hand and sturdy will. I don't ask for beauty, only for someone who won't leave." Josephine wasn't beautiful. Not in the way men meant when they said it. Her face was long, with a hawkish nose and eyes too large for the rest. Her hands were calloused from mill work and soap. She had no family left. Nothing left, really, except the echo of her mother's words, "Make yourself useful or make yourself gone." She had replied to Elias Cutter's letter 3 months ago. There had been back and forths, careful, precise. He liked that she could read and write, that she had lost people and knew what silence meant. He liked that she wasn't needy, said as much. Then the letters stopped, but she came anyway. It was the kind of act people called foolish when they meant desperate. The sheriff pointed her toward Cutter's land, 10 miles west, out past the split mesa. She walked, no wagon to spare, the stage gone before she could ask. By the time the sun kissed the far ridge, she saw the house. A 2-story place of faded pine, bigger than she'd imagined, but slumped like it had known better days. The barn was intact. Fence needed mending. No smoke from the chimney. Just quiet and that uncanny stillness you feel when a place has lost its children. A man stood by the porch, arms crossed. He was younger than she thought, maybe 35, tall, broad-shouldered. His face had been handsome once, but something sour had gnawed the softness from it. His beard was patchy, eyes pale like boiled-down frost. "Elias Cutter?" she asked, even though she knew. He nodded once, slow. "I'm Josephine." He looked at her like she'd tracked mud into church. "I know who you are." She waited. He didn't move. "I got your letters," she said. "Didn't tell you to come." "You stopped writing. But you didn't say no." That was the no. She felt her hands trembling, not from fear, from the knowledge she'd made a mistake and still had to wear it to the end. "I came to be your wife," she said. "You ain't my wife. You ain't what I asked for." A silence opened, deep and sharp. "You're too scrawny," he said. "You got a crow's face and a mill girl's hands. You ain't what I need out here." She wanted to tell him that loneliness didn't come with the right shape. That grief warped everything, but she only nodded once, turned around. "Wait," he said, and for a moment she thought maybe he saw something, maybe it was pride talking. Then he added, "There's a boarding house in Dunridge. They take in your kind. Tell 'em you're from Boston and they'll pity you faster." She didn't reply, didn't flinch. Josephine walked back down the path as the sky darkened, red leaking into indigo, every step a razor. She walked because there was nowhere to fall, walked until the house was a smudge behind her and the prairie opened its jaws. She didn't cry. That night, she slept under the stars with a wolf howling 2 ridges away and her satchel for a pillow. In the morning, she began again. She'd learn why Elias Cutter lived in that great hollow house with no children's laughter and no wife to speak of. She'd learn what he'd lost and why the town whispered his name like it was cursed. And she would bury the part of her that wanted kindness until all that remained was resolve. Josephine didn't come west to be chosen. She came west to survive, and in surviving, she would rebuild the thing he'd tried to forget, his family. Even if he thought she was unworthy. The Dunridge boarding house sat above the saloon, its windows clouded with cooking grease and river dust. The landlady, Miss Teely, gave Josephine a room in the back where the walls sweated resin and the bed sagged in the middle. It was the kind of place women passed through on their way to something else or nothing at all. Miss Teely said little, only handed her a key and a warning: you pay weekly. You cause trouble, you go. Josephine worked at the bakery first. Swept floors, peeled apples, cleaned out mouse nests behind the flour sacks. Then came the sewing shop, stitching hems with fingers already calloused raw. When they let her go too quiet, they said, she took work at the livery, brushing horses until her arms ached. She did not complain, she did not ask, she listened, and the stories came. Elias Cutter had once had a wife, 2 daughters. He'd built that big house with his own hands, wood cut from his own timber line. They said he'd brought the women west against better judgment, chasing some land grant dream. Then came the fire, not lightning, not bandits, just something gone wrong in the kitchen. Some said it was a stove pipe. Others said it was the youngest girl, 6 years old, playing with matches. They burned in that house. Cutter was out hunting deer, didn't come back till morning. By then it was ash and bones. He rebuilt the house. Alone. Folks said that was the first sign something inside him snapped. Didn't bury his family in town. Dug graves behind the barn, planted cottonwood over them, then stopped speaking to anyone for near a year. When he talked again, it was only business. Feed, fence, mule harnesses, never sorrow, never remembrance. Josephine listened. She worked. She kept her face down, her hands moving, but her mind mapped every word. 3 weeks passed. One afternoon, she crossed the street to the general store and found a girl sitting on the back steps. Skinny, feral-eyed, 9, maybe 10, no shoes. She held a pocket knife in her lap and was carving crude shapes into the rail post. Josephine crouched. "You live here." The girl didn't answer. Her hair was the color of creek mud, wild as bramble. One eye drooped slightly. "What's your name?" The girl looked at her like a coyote might, not scared, just waiting to see if Josephine would flinch. "Name, Pearl," she said finally. "You have family." "Sort of." She jabbed the knife toward the alley behind the butcher. "Ma's there, most days, not always standing up." Josephine didn't ask more. She just sat, let the silence do the talking. Later, Miss Teely warned her not to get attached. "That one bites." Her mother was working the rooms till her mind cracked. Now she drinks turpentine and sings to pigeons. Girls half wild. Josephine nodded, but that night she brought an extra biscuit down to the back steps. Pearl was there. She took it without thanks, without hesitation. Weeks passed. The girl followed Josephine sometimes, like a shadow that didn't want to admit it belonged. She watched how Josephine handled things. Quiet, steady, no sudden movements, no pity in her face. Then came the snow, early, hard. Cattle died out on the Cutter Range. 2 men from town were hired to help pull carcasses from the ice, but one got drunk and quit. Josephine saw the poster in the post office: help wanted, Cutter Ranch, pays honest. She didn't knock this time, she walked. Snow came up past her ankles by the time she reached the house again. Smoke this time curled from the chimney, thin and uncertain. The porch steps creaked under her boots. Elias Cutter opened the door with the same look he'd worn weeks before. Surprise turned to bitterness. "I ain't hiring women," he said. "You need help, I'm help. You don't know ranch work. I've watched men do it long enough to fake it. That's most of the job anyway." He studied her. "Why are you back? I heard your daughters died. I heard your house burned. I heard you built it again anyway. So, I know what it's like to be the only one left who remembers." Something flickered. Not sorrow, not apology, something more like caution. "You trying to fix me?" "No, just your fences." He let her in. Josephine worked through the freeze. Hauled feed, dragged carcasses, stitched torn hide, salted what meat could be salvaged. She cooked only enough for strength and said little. At night, she slept in the empty bunkhouse, my scurrying overhead, wind whispering through the loose boards. He didn't speak much either. But one morning she found him staring at the cottonwoods behind the barn. Wind bent their thin limbs. She didn't need to ask who lay beneath. "I never should have sent for a wife," he said, not looking at her. She waited. "Some things rot you from the inside. Doesn't matter what new skin you stretch over it." "I'm not new skin." He looked at her then, really looked. "No," he said, "you're something else." That was the start, not of a romance, of a reckoning. Over the weeks, she learned where the girls' rooms had been. She swept their old floors, found a ribbon under the loose baseboard, a marble in the ash of the hearth. A crayon drawing burned at the edges but still showing two stick figures holding hands. Josephine didn't speak of them. She just placed the drawing in a tin box and put it on the mantel. Elias didn't touch it, but he didn't throw it away. Pearl came by in late January, said her mother had disappeared. Josephine took her in. Elias didn't object. He just watched, wordless, as Pearl curled up in the corner of the bunkhouse and fell asleep without crying. Josephine covered her with her own coat. Snow fell again. And this time the house did not burn. By spring, Pearl had made herself a part of the land. She chased chickens through the thawing yard, nailed rusted coffee tins to the fence posts, and named each cow like they were storybook villains. She called the old plow horse Widow May and tied feathers to its mane. When she found a nest of dead mice in the tack room, she buried them proper, murmuring nonsense over the graves like a priestess from some half-lost country. Elias watched from a distance, always from a distance. Josephine didn't push him. She worked the ranch with a rhythm now, one that matched the pulse of the place. She rose before dawn, poured the scalded coffee, checked the fencing, saw to the goats. There were only 2, but they acted like 10. She patched the barn roof, stitched Elias' ripped shirts, taught Pearl her letters in the evenings. In those quiet hours, with the girl leaning over the page, tongue between her teeth, Elias sometimes stood at the edge of the doorway, hands in his pockets, saying nothing. His silence had changed shape. It no longer warned, it waited. In April, a rider came. He wore a deputy star and sweat under his arms, a man built on nerves. He dismounted like he expected bullets. "You cut her?" he asked. Elias stepped forward, chin tight. The deputy glanced at Josephine and Pearl but didn't speak until she sent the girl inside. There was a man in Rawlins, got himself shot stealing horses, had a paper on him. Said he'd married a woman named Lysette Pierce. Had a daughter, Pearl, same age as hers. He nodded toward the door. Elias crossed his arms. And Lysette Pierce was wanted in Kansas. Fraud, arson, possibly worse. Disappeared 10 years ago. Changed her name after running off from a husband who, well, let's just say she left bodies behind. Not her doing, maybe. Josephine stepped forward. "What's that got to do with the girl?" "County wants her placed," the deputy said. "She can't stay here." Pearl heard that. She was behind the door listening. The scream came fast, animal fast, the kind that rises from a place deeper than language. She ran, bolted into the scrub behind the barn. Josephine caught up only because she knew the girl's speed, knew how she turned with her right leg first always, how she flinched at crows but not at owls. Pearl fought, bit, kicked, twisted. "I won't go," she sobbed. "They'll lock me up or give me to some preacher's wife who'll cut my hair and make me pray till my knees bleed. I won't go. I won't." Josephine wrapped her arms around her and said nothing. She didn't need to say it. She wasn't going to let her go. Back at the ranch, Elias argued with the deputy. "This girl's got a roof, she's fed, she's schooling. She's not out picking pockets or poisoning wells." The deputy didn't back down. "It ain't up to you." "You want to drag a screaming child off my land," Elias said. "Then you do it yourself. See how that sits with Dunridge. The deputy muttered about warrants and county judges and jurisdiction. But he rode off without the girl. Elias came back to the bunkhouse that night and stood in the doorway. I can't protect her if the law comes back with force, he said. I know. But I'll lie if I have to. Josephine nodded. And something passed between them then, not affection, something fiercer, a pact. In May the rains came, the creek flooded. One of the pasture bridges went out, and a calf nearly drowned before Pearl found it, clinging to a root. Elias carried the calf back himself, swearing the whole way, mud up to his thighs. Josephine watched from the hill, Pearl beside her, grinning like she'd stolen something holy. The house began to change. Josephine planted beans along the eastern wall. Pearl made a swing from the old tire in the shed. Elias fixed the hinges on the upstairs bedroom. He didn't say why. One night, Josephine heard him pacing. She stepped onto the porch. Found him smoking, back hunched. I should have died in that fire, he said. You didn't. I spent 5 years wishing I had. Do you still? He shook his head, but I don't know what that means. She sat beside him. He didn't touch her. But he didn't move away. I called you unworthy, he said after a long time. I remember. You stayed anyway. I didn't stay for you. He nodded. That's the part I can't forget. By June, Pearl had her own drawer in the main house. Her own cup on the shelf. Her handwriting still looked like chicken scratch, but she was reading Pilgrim's Progress with her finger under each word. She helped birth a calf and didn't flinch at the blood. Elias began saying her name out loud. Josephine watched him from the garden one morning as he lifted Pearl up to reach a loose shingle. They weren't smiling. Neither one ever smiled much. But they moved around each other now like people who had decided something permanent. Later that day, Josephine walked to the graves beneath the cottonwoods, sat with her back against the bark, knees drawn up. She didn't cry. She hadn't in years, but she whispered low and clear, they're not replacing you, they're just not forgetting. That night, Elias came to her with a single question. Would you stay if I never asked again? She looked at him for a long time. No, she said, but I'll stay if you ask once, and mean it. He opened his mouth, closed it, then said, stay. And she did, not as a bride, not yet, but as something deeper. A woman who rebuilt the shape of a family with hands the world had called unfit, and a girl who no longer feared being left behind. The prairie burned that summer, not with flame, but with heat. The sun bore down like it meant to flatten the land, turn the hills to bone in silence. Dust clung to the backs of teeth. Wells shrank. Animals moved slower, tongues lolling, eyes glassy with thirst. At the Cutter Ranch, the creek ran thin as a ribbon, and the corn Josephine had planted browned at the edges, curling inward like it wanted to die alone. Still, they endured. Josephine carried water before dawn, a bucket on each hip. Pearl rose with her now, no longer needing to be shaken awake. She fed the chickens without being asked. Read aloud to herself while sweeping the porch. Sometimes, in the heat-hung afternoons, she lay on the barn loft and watched the sky change shape. Elias worked beside Josephine in the fields. Quiet, steady. The lines in his face had softened in places, though he still barked when the fence line sagged or when Pearl left the goat pen unlatched. But he apologized now, even if it took him a day to say it. Once, during a thunderless dusk, he said, I didn't know what to do with kindness before. I thought it was just another way to ask for something. Josephine wiped her brow and said nothing. They both knew the work was harder than the words. Then came Silas Grigg. He rode into Dunridge in a black coat, wrong for the heat, on a gray horse with a roach mane. He wore a revolver on one hip and a badge on the other, but it wasn't any badge local to Wyoming. The sheriff squinted at it and called it federal, That was all it took. Silas asked questions about Pearl, about Josephine, about Lysette Pierce. Said he was a bounty man working under contract. Said the girl might be tied to a case out of Topeka. Said there were claims on her blood. Quiet claims, he called them. Ones that didn't get printed but still paid well. He watched the ranch from a rise east of the property for 3 days. Josephine saw him. Pearl saw him too. Elias saddled his gelding at dusk and rode out to meet the man alone. They talked for less than 10 minutes. Later, Elias returned with dust in his teeth and murder in his silence. He said she's worth money, Elias told Josephine as he scraped his boots on the porch, to someone with lawyers and old debts. Said she's heir to a liability, like she's just a scrap of land or a rotted fence line. Josephine waited. I told him if he set foot on my land again, I'd put a bullet behind his ear. Will he? Elias met her gaze. He wants the money more than his life. That night, Josephine locked the doors for the first time in weeks. She kept her shotgun loaded and under the bed. Pearl didn't ask why. She had seen enough in her life to read danger like weather. They kept working the land by day, but each of them carried something new in their posture, a coiled edge, a readiness. They no longer spoke of rebuilding. Now it was about holding, about defending. Silas Grigg came down from the ridge in the first week of August. He waited until dusk again. Same black coat, same gray horse, but this time he wasn't alone. 2 other men flanked him. Hired hands, likely, guns for dust and coin. Josephine saw the dust trails before she heard their hoofbeats. She stood on the porch, Pearl behind her. Elias came from the barn, rifle slung low. Grigg raised a hand, mock civil. We don't want blood, he called. We just want what's owed. Pearl stepped beside Josephine. Don't, Josephine whispered. I ain't hiding. Elias raised his voice. You've been warned. Grigg's smile was slow. And you've been warned about harboring. We're not harboring anything, Josephine said. We're raising her. Grigg chuckled. You got no claim. You're not blood, not kin. You're just a mail-order bride who didn't even get wed. Josephine leveled the shotgun across the railing. Don't mean I won't bury you. The standoff held. Then the thunder cracked, not from the sky, from Elias' rifle, a warning shot. The men hesitated, calculated. This wasn't a town street or a saloon where barked threats passed for justice. This was prairie law, and prairie law said the one with the ground beneath their feet had the right to defend it. Grigg turned. He spat in the dust. We'll be back, he said. They rode off into the dark. Josephine didn't lower her gun until the last hoofbeat faded. Pearl didn't say a word. She reached for Josephine's hand and held it until her fingers stopped shaking. Later, when the moon was high and the wind dry as bone, Elias came to the kitchen. He took off his hat, sat down, ran his hand through his hair like a man untangling something deep. We need to make it real, he said. Josephine looked up from the table. You and me, he continued. We marry, it gives us ground, gives Pearl something legal to stand on. She becomes ours, not just by blood, by bond. It's not about what we feel. It's about what we hold together. Josephine didn't smile, but she nodded. And somewhere in the dark behind the barn, the cottonwoods creaked like old ghosts leaning in to listen. The wedding was held in the parlor, with dust thick in the corners and sunlight slicing through the curtains like blades. No church, no preacher, just an old justice of the peace from Dunridge, drunk on corn liquor and too tired to ask questions. Elias wore his best coat. Josephine wore a dress she had stitched from the cotton saved for curtains. It didn't matter that it hung plain or that her boots were scuffed. She stood tall. He said the words with a rasp in his throat. Pearl brought them the rings, 2 bent copper bands cut from a feed bucket handle. She grinned as she handed them over. Now if you fight, you gotta do it legal. The justice laughed so hard, he nearly dropped his Bible. After he left, the house was quiet again, but it wasn't the same quiet. It held something now, something built. That night, Elias and Josephine sat on the porch, side by side. No celebration, just stillness. She poured 2 tin cups of coffee and passed him one. He cleared his throat. I'm not good with gentle. I didn't come west for gentle. Pearl slept in the old upstairs bedroom now, the one that used to belong to Elias' youngest. Josephine had scrubbed the walls and hung a fresh quilt. Pearl lined the windowsill with rocks and feathers, her version of prayer. They were a family, not by blood, not by law really, though the papers said otherwise now. They were a family because the world had tried to scatter them and failed. Grig didn't return for weeks. The land cracked under the heat. Calves were born weak. The wind shifted. Josephine planted late beans and hoped the rains would come. Elias rode farther each day, checking fence, tracking signs. At night he came home covered in sweat and dust and silence. One morning he came back with news. Griggs camped 2 miles east, he said. He's watching. Waiting. Josephine tightened her grip on the dish she was drying. Alone. No for now. Looking for a way in. They'll wait for dark, or when we're divided. Pearl stood at the door, fists clenched. We could just go. Leave this place. No, Josephine said. We built this. They don't get to take it. Pearl blinked back tears. They took everything from my ma. I didn't think they could take more. They won't. Josephine meant it, but she didn't say the rest. They'll have to kill me first. That evening she rode to Dunridge, found the sheriff sipping whiskey on the porch of the jailhouse. I need 5 rifles and good men behind them, she said. The sheriff didn't answer at first. Just looked out toward the hills. Cutter doesn't ask for help. I'm not Cutter, I'm his wife, I'm asking. You can't pay what mercenaries cost. No, but I've got land and gratitude. The sheriff rubbed his jaw. We don't want a war. It's already started. You just ain't heard the first shots yet. By sundown, 2 men agreed to come. Both owed Elias favors from years past. One had a shotgun with a cracked barrel. The other brought a Sharps rifle older than the county itself. They set up in the loft of the barn, eyes sharp. That night, Josephine lay in bed with her boots on. Elias sat at the window with a repeater across his lap. Pearl slept between them on a pile of blankets, breathing soft. In the hours before dawn, the dog barked once. Then the silence snapped. Gunfire cracked through the trees, not wild, precise. Josephine grabbed her shotgun and pushed Pearl beneath the bed. Elias didn't speak. He moved to the door, crouched low, waited. A shadow darted past the window. Josephine fired. A scream tore through the night. Another man came up from the side, crawling along the porch. Elias opened the door and shot him clean through the shoulder. Then came Griggs' voice, calm as a priest's. This ain't worth dying for, Cutter. Give us the girl and walk away. Elias didn't reply. Josephine stepped beside him. She's ours. That means we do die for her. Another shot rang out. One of the hired men in the loft yelled, hit but still firing. It lasted less than 10 minutes. Griggs' men weren't used to resistance, not from a woman in a feed-sack dress or a rancher half-mad from grief. One fled into the trees. Another bled out behind the woodpile. Grigg himself stayed hidden until the end. Josephine found him crawling along the creek bed at sunrise, pistol in one hand, bleeding from a graze across his scalp. He looked up at her and smiled, wild and strange. You're not even her blood. She's mine anyway. You're not worthy. Josephine leveled the shotgun. No, she said, but I'm enough. She pulled the trigger. The blast echoed through the cottonwoods. The creek ran red for a few feet, then cleared again. By midday, the sheriff rode out, found the bodies buried proper, found Elias on the porch, eyes sunken but calm, found Pearl writing her name in the dust on the windowsill. Josephine was already in the fields, sleeves rolled, planting late. "You all right?" the sheriff asked her. She wiped her brow. "We're still here." That was all, still here, still standing. The family no one chose, holding the land no one thought they deserved. The grave for Silas Grigg was shallow, marked with a rock Josephine did not carve. They buried him past the line of the cottonwoods, outside the fence, where the grass never took. Elias said little. Pearl asked once if she could spit on it, and Josephine said, "Not now, maybe later." That was the last they spoke of him. The summer dragged on in dry fits. The corn failed, but the beans came back, tough as nails, curling stubborn up the lattice Josephine had built from scrap iron. The cattle held, the fence stayed up. The creek ran slow, but it ran. Life didn't thrive, it endured. Pearl grew quieter. She had always been feral, but now she moved with a sort of watchfulness that didn't match her age. When she climbed trees, she kept one eye on the horizon. When she laughed, which happened more now, it was sudden, sharp, then gone, like a bird startled from a branch. She had her mother's cunning and Josephine's steadiness. It made her dangerous in a way no man could quite name. That fall, Elias rebuilt the front gate, not because it needed it, because he wanted to. He sanded each plank smooth, carved the family brand into the crossbeam. Not his old one, a new one, a circle split by a single thorn branch. Pearl said it looked like a mouth that could speak and bite in the same breath. "Seems right," Josephine said. The house took on weight in the cold months. The kind of weight that comes from stories and skin and breath-warming wood. Josephine lined the pantry with jars of preserved vegetables, taught Pearl to sew straight seams and saddle a mule with one arm. Elias fixed the fireplace, carried in logs with the same rhythm every night. They didn't speak often. They didn't need to. There were nights Josephine watched him watch the fire. His face would twist into that old ache, his daughter's, the fire, the way grief grinds down until only silence survives it. She would set her hand over his, not to stop it, just to steady the shaking. He never said thank you. She never needed him to. In early December, a letter arrived, addressed to Mrs. Josephine Cutter. It came from Kansas, official, printed in ink too crisp to mean anything good. Josephine read it twice, burned it in the stove. When Elias came in from feeding the goats, she handed him the ash. He stared at it. What did they want? To challenge guardianship, some distant cousin of Pearl, suddenly interested. "She doesn't know them. She knows us." He reached for the ash and crumpled it further in his calloused hand. "They won't take her," he said. "They won't get the chance." By spring, Pearl turned 11. Josephine made a cake with flour they couldn't spare. Elias whittled a comb from cedar. Pearl said nothing, just hugged them both in a way that felt too adult, too final. That evening, Josephine took her walking up the ridge, past the cottonwoods, past Grigg's grave, to a place where the prairie stretched unbroken in all directions. "This land," Josephine said, "was never meant to belong to people like us." Pearl squinted into the wind. "Then why do we stay?" "Because we're the only ones who know what to do with it." Pearl nodded, took her hand, said nothing. In the years that followed, the Cutter Ranch grew again. Slowly, Josephine taught Pearl to read court filings and livestock ledgers. Elias taught her to track coyote by starlight. They hired a young couple from town to help during the summers. A boy was born in the bunkhouse. Pearl named him Ridge, after the place he was born, and swore to keep him safe. The past did not leave them. It lived in the creak of floorboards, in the scars behind Elias' eyes, in the way Josephine still checked the locks before bed. But they did not run from it. They built over it, layered love and sweat and dirt until it stopped bleeding. On the anniversary of the fire, Elias stood beneath the cottonwoods and said each daughter's name aloud. Pearl carved them into a plank and nailed it above the door. No one spoke of Worth anymore. They didn't need to. Josephine had rebuilt what the fire took, not the same daughters, not the same life, but a new blood, a new root, born of loss. Raised in defiance, held together by a woman once called Unworthy. And the land, at last, whispered its approval in wind and rain and the slow, steady rhythm of things that endure.